There's revival and it's spreading like a wildfire in my heart. Sunday morning, hallelujah, and it's lasting all week long. Can you hear it? Can you feel it? It's the rhythm of a gospel song.
I want you to get the message today. I heard a true story. How many remember the story? They used to tell this on sports, and when I say it, you'll remember. It's called The Miracle on Ice. How many remember that story about the hockey team in 1980 that defeated all the opponents? They were all a bunch of rookies, and then they went on to even defeat the Russians. And if you were sitting there listening to Al Michael, and as they come down to the very end, he said, "Do you believe in miracles?" Because the Russians had destroyed them just about 2 months earlier in an exhibition game in New York. And they had not lost in years. This team was phenomenal. But I want to tell you about a greater miracle that I read about. In that same year in Minnesota, a young girl who was out partying, her name was Jennifer Henley, and slid off the road. It was 22 below zero. She walked almost 2 miles trying to get help and collapsed in the yard of an elderly man. At 7 a.m., he walked outside to let his dog, who had been barking all night, and he could not understand why, and there to his horror was a completely frozen body. And this is not a made-up story. This made history. When he grabs the girl, she is completely frozen. That literally, it's like dragging, he described it, a frozen animal that had died, and it was completely, her hands was reached out like this, but he said he noticed a little pool of blood toward her nose, which gave him hope that maybe she could survive. He threw her in his van easily, wife came and helped, and they rushed her to the hospital. Her body temperature was 80 when they tried to take her temperature. They could not get a needle in her arm because her skin had completely frozen. The doctors had said that sadly, even if she survived, there's no doubt she'll be brain dead. If she survived, she would certainly lose both her arms, and her legs would have to be amputated because of frostbite. Surely this would have happened to a girl who had stayed all night out in the cold, minus 22 degrees. And to everybody's shock, the doctor slowly warmed her body back up, hoping that a miracle would take place, and then it happened. And Jennifer Henley is one of the first persons ever to known in medical history that survived all night 22 below zero. But she later would recount her life, and she said, "I don't even remember that moment of that time," because she, I guess, blacked out. Don't remember any of the events until a few days later when she woke up in the hospital. And she recounts that she thought she had been in love with a boy that night. And of course, he had jilted her at this party they were at. And you know, love can have a funny turn, can't it? I'm going to read to you today about a lady, if she'll put the scripture on for me. I'm going to read to you about a lady who thought she found love, but she didn't know what love was. You know the scriptures. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in what? Adultery. Do you understand what the adultery is? I think everybody who's adult can understand that. That's when you are married and you're having a sexual relationship outside the bonds of marriage. And when they had set her in the midst, they said to him, this is Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery," in the very act. Did you catch that part? It wasn't just hearsay. It wasn't just we think she was doing it. They caught her doing it. Now, often I always think of the story that Joel told when he killed the copperhead out here years ago. You know, there was 2 of them mating. You've heard me tell this before. And somebody said, "Well, which one did you kill, preacher, the male or the female?" And Joel, in his honest modesty, said, "Well, I killed the female." And the guy who asked the question, Lee, was carrying the cross when he threw it. He saw the copperheads. We were practicing the drama for Easter. And somebody said, "Well, preacher, how'd you know that was the girl?" How'd you know about girl snakes? Joel giggled and said, well, the girls always get caught. And the poor boy runs and slithers away. A lot of truth in that statement, isn't it, in society today? And here she is caught in the act. And, of course, the question I always wanted to ask in school was, well, where's the guy? If they caught her and drug her out, where's the other? I'm not the smartest feller in that's been on this earth, but if you're caught in the act of adultery, I do believe it takes two. But you see, they didn't care about the other man. They cared about tempting Jesus. And of all the things that you will receive this love time, the greatest love letter is written in the sand. Number one, she didn't understand the difference between love and lust. That is so true today in our society. We are confused as a society today. We think that lust is love. But let me remind you what a woman said years ago. They had a national talk radio station. She said, love gives a ring. Lust gives a condom. There's a difference. That's what she said. But it's the truth, isn't it? Lust gives a one-night stand or until it feels good, until you get tired of it. But she said love is staying forever. And you see, our society today is built on sexual drives. If you really want to be rich, even in time of poverty, get involved in the sexual industry somehow and you will make money. I'll promise you. And it's sad what's taking place, that these young people and young adults and sometimes middle-aged and even older folks are confusing love with lust. I don't know if you know this or not. This may shock you, but it shouldn't. But did you know that the second highest rate of transmitted diseases is among the elderly now? Isn't that scary? I worked one summer at Appalachia Christian Village in Johnson City there, going to school, and I was just a little orderly. I called myself Dr. Vital because that's the only thing I knew to do is take your vitals. So I would pretend as I'd walk the halls at night and call myself, yes, here comes Dr. Vital. And I'll never forget this older man. I was helping him get dressed one night, and I'm sure he's long passed away because he was in his 90s then, and this was back in the early 80s. And I was getting him dressed up and got him all duded up, and I said, well, where are you going, Mr. Johnson? He said, I got me a date, son. Well, I said, that's nice. I said, well, what time you be back tonight? Because there they could come and go. You know, they had little cottages. And I said, I'll be looking for you. He said, son, if it goes right, I'll see you Monday. Now, we giggle at that, but it's really not funny. See, she confused love with lust. She had a lot of lust. We assume by her occupation, and we don't know this because the Bible don't say it, but we assume she was probably a woman of the night. And she'd been abused, I'm sure, many times by men. When we ran the Promised Land, many times we'd take girls out there that was prostituting here or stripping down here, and it was just so heartbreaking to hear their stories, how they were mistreated and abused. And you know, the truth was they were looking for love. But they had become confused between love and lust. We think making love is the thing that God expects us to do. Well, He does teach us as married couples to do that. But that was not intended outside the bondage of marriage. And you see, it was a distraction. And it was a fatal time of her life. And even though she was alive, here's my point, listen to this, she was frozen like little Henley girl was spiritually. Jesus compared people, Jesus, not Danny, not the Christian church, Jesus said, people are dead men walking as bones in a shell. If you're not born again, as Jesus said, you're dead spiritually. It's what He told Nicodemus in John 3:3, unless you're born again of the water and the Spirit, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. and heaven. And too many people today are, even in this love thing, they're just dead. They're frozen. They're worse than that poor girl freezing outside, because inside they become colder and colder, and they go through one relationship out of another relationship, and it's in and out and in and out. And sadly, then the children come along, and they don't know what love is, because they sit there and watch what mamas or daddies are doing, and they see how the parents are abusing each other, if they're even in their parents, or they see how the boyfriend's abusing the mama, and vice versa. We were talking about this yesterday. Somebody and I were talking, said, why is it that a woman stays 9 times with a man that abuses her? That's what the statistic says. And I said, well, I know that answer, because she don't know the difference between love and lust. Listen to this. Paul writes and tells us what true love is, 1 Corinthians 13th chapter. You know it well. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not arrogant. It does not boast of itself. Love seeks the benefit of the other. Now you see, when Paul is talking about this, most people use this in marriages, and that's good. And we usually say something about it in a marriage ceremony, but let me tell you who he's really talking about. If you don't know, he's talking about our Lord Jesus Christ. He's talking about what God was, and how wonderful Christ was patient with this woman. You see, she confused love with lust. Secondly, she didn't know the difference between romantic love and spiritual love. I've often told the true story. When me and Cheryl began to date, that we found out quickly that both of us was in love with somebody else. And that was the truth. And we found out that that same person was the same person because it was Jesus Christ. It was easy to love my wife because she loved the Lord, and I knew her desire was to be more like the Lord, and vice versa. My desire was to serve the Lord. And because of that, you see, we've got along through the years. That doesn't mean we haven't had our ups and downs. She's finally broke me in, boys. And I didn't mind it. I just tell you the truth. I'm sure there was ways I could have improved in many times of life. But you see, and I'm being honest, I've said this from the pulpit before, I didn't know how to treat a woman because I didn't have a father that treated my mother that way. He left. And so when you don't see the example, it was hard. But let me tell you what helped me was I got to looking at people like J.W. and Joel and Dick and Thelma Powell, how I missed them so many times. I got to looking at older brothers in Christ and began to talk to them and say, you know, is this really how we're supposed to? And they began to share with me what it was, the difference between romantic love and spiritual love. This woman didn't know that. She thought that love could only be bought or sold. And she did not realize the love that Jesus was going to give her was not the physical love, but it was an inside love that took care of the physical love too. Listen to that. When they asked the old man that went and got the young girl Henley what possessed him to even go out and try to take her to the hospital, he said, my wife said, if she's alive, we've got to do something. And he said, I said to her, you know she couldn't have survived this 22 below zero for how many hours ungodly she laid out there. And he said that my wife pleaded with me and said, but we've got to try. You see, when you are in love with Jesus, it teaches you to love other people. It teaches you to be patient. Now, Jesus didn't condone her way of life. Don't mistake this. He didn't sit there and turn a blind eye what she was doing. He knew the Mosaic Law, and if you don't know what the Mosaic Law was here right now, what was the punishment for adultery? To be stoned to death. Boy, if we did that today. Woo! I'll let you just think about that one for a while. And they didn't care about her. They didn't mean nothing to her, these Pharisees. They were just simply trying to entrap our Lord. And Jesus looked at her, and he had a moment in his life that he could have condemned her because she was wrong. He did not say, notice in the scripture, tell me if I'm wrong, he did not say, now you boys have lied on her. Because he read their thoughts and minds, but he also read hers. But Jesus did what only God would do. He reached down in the sand, and you know the story. He began to write a letter of love. To this day, nobody knows, no author knows, no minister knows. There's no biblical person has no idea what Jesus Christ wrote. Some people think that he wrote these other men's sins. And some people, I've heard preachers say that, well, maybe he wrote down there and said, well, boys, you're condemning her to death, but you all slept with her last night, and the night before, and the night before. I don't know what he wrote. But here's what I do know what he wrote. I think he wrote that the fact that he loved her enough that he would die for her. Because the Bible is very clear after he writes, and when he looks up, her accusers are gone. Let's go on. Verse 6. This they said, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger, as though he did not hear. I love the fact that our Jesus don't pay attention to what human beings say about each other. Don't you love that? Somebody this week come to me and said, look, you're going to get a phone call. I said, I am. They said, yeah, you're going to get a phone call because some of my family's mad at me and they're going to tell you all about me. I said, well, good. And the person looked at me a little funny and said, well, what do you mean by that? I said, do you think that that's going to change my opinion of you? If you do, you know nothing about me. Nothing about me. I've had preachers get angry at me because I won't take their side against another preacher. I've had that happen to me. You know. And I say, well, wait a minute, boys, what happened between you two was your all's problem. Now, I'll certainly be wary and I'll watch, but until they do something against us, I'm going to try to love them. It doesn't matter what people say about you. Don't let this cause you to feel less of a person because somebody don't understand you or they don't agree with you or they try to condemn you in your life. Listen to what Jesus has to say. Because he's the one in the end, folks, that's going to either judge you to eternity of heaven or hell. It's only Jesus. So notice he didn't hear. So when they continued asking him, they just keep talking, don't they? Did you ever notice that too? Somebody's all riled up, they don't know when to hush. Seriously, did you ever notice that?
Transform the roof on your home, church, or business into this. A 5-rib metal panel roof from Dry Home Roofing, a Christian-owned roofing company specializing in metal roofing and gutters. We install 29 and 26 gauge metal roofing with a 40-year warranty and a 2-year labor warranty. Our patented end cap helps to prevent wind damage and control water flow off the end of the roof. For your free estimate, contact Dry Home Roofing to transform your roof today.
So Jesus listens to them talk, but he raised himself up and said to them, who is without sin, let him cast the first stone. Now again, I want to important you get this today, as we got just a couple more minutes. Jesus was nowhere at all condoning her wrong. If he did that, he could not be the Son of God. He come to die for sin. He never come to condone sin. And we're again mistaken on this in our society today. We seriously believe that no matter what we do, and I don't say you, but our society believes no matter what we say or do, there is no actions behind it, there's no accountability behind it. Folks, if that theory keeps going in our world today, you listen to me, one day a man will use this as a defense when they have him on trial for murdering a little child. I was born that way. I couldn't help myself, Your Honor. I was created to do this. And when that judge buys into that, you talk about a terrible place to live then. You see, Jesus did not condone her wrongs. He just didn't condemn her to death. He was doing what He has done for everybody by teaching him what love is, to forgive people, to care about people, to give them a chance to redeem themselves. And then she became to know the difference between physical love and spiritual love. Oh, she'd met a lot of men, I'm sure. But nobody ever loved her. I remember a young girl from my high school days, actually my middle school days. I can still remember her name, and it won't matter. But I assumed the way she talked that she was very sexually active in the 7th and 8th grade. I didn't even know in 7th, 8th grade what half she was talking about, just to be honest with you. That's how dumb I was. And I'm thankful to God I was. But I ran into her about 15 years ago when I went up home. I didn't recognize her. She was my age, but she looked like she was 30 to 40 years older. And we got to talking, and I said to her, I said, well, did you ever get married? No. No, nobody ever wanted to marry me. Sadly, she had several kids, but nobody to love. You know, again, I'm afraid this is our society today. You know, she came to know the difference, this woman did, in a physical love versus spiritual love. And when you know the Lord, you know what love is. Not just the physical, but you know the best part, the spiritual love. And when you love the Lord and begin to love Him and fall in love with Him and let Him love you back, listen, it changes your whole perspective of everybody in life. Everybody. I was at the McDonald's this morning at 6:45 getting my cup of coffee. A senior one at that. 55 cents. Pretty good deal. And I said to the young lady working there, I said, are you going to get to go to church? She said, no, sir, I'm working here today. And I said, well, don't you go to church? Well, when I'm off. And she said, but sadly, you know, I'm having to be here. I said, well, don't you have Sunday night service? She said, no, we don't have no Sunday night service. I said, we do. And here's a card. I said, I don't care if you come in your McDonald's clothes. I want you to come because I want you to know the Lord loves you. She said, but you're a white man. Would you invite me to a church? I said, everybody's welcome at our church. Listen to me. You see, when you let the Lord love you, it changes your whole perspective of life. So He begins to write in the sand as it's now past time and I need to quit. But listen to me, I only got up here 5 after, so give me a little break. When she let Jesus love her, she learned what love was about. She learned the greatest word that love ever gives. It's called forgiveness. And I'm going to tell you, the greatest gift you'll ever give anybody is to teach them the love of Christ. Not just to love them for a physicalness or love them for an emotional a status or to fill a void, but to teach them to love Christ. And you love the Lord. But I love the story that a friend of mine in Cincinnati who preached his whole life there told. How the day that his mother died, and his father took her up in his arms. That was his bride. They'd been married over 60-some years. And he held her while she took her last breath. And he said, we all came in for the service. It was a bitter cold time in Ohio. And we buried our mama that day and said we came back to the little old tiny house that Dad had built outside of Cincinnati. And you had to understand he had 2 boys and they were both preachers in the Christian church. Went to Cincinnati Bible College. And he said it was about dark time and kids was in there playing in the other room. Our wives was in there talking to each other and said, all of a sudden, Dad at the dinner table said, wonder what your mama's doing right now. Wonder what she's doing in heaven right now. And he said, you know, here we're both college Bible preachers, preaching for years, and we, of course, he had been an elder and a deacon in church all of his life, and a lay preacher too, and even filled in. And he says, well, Daddy, you know, she's probably meeting her parents, and she's probably met her loved ones, and she's met Jesus, and she met God, and it's untelling the list of people that she's sitting there hugging and having a good time. And all of a sudden, he said, to my shock, Daddy said, let's go back to the grave now. And they said, no, Dad, it's bitterly cold outside. Why do we want to go back there now? And he insisted, against their wishes, he said, boys, just you and me, come with me. He didn't want the daughter-in-laws or the grandkids. He said, just you guys go with me. And of course, they went. When they got to the shallow dug grave that was covered up, the flowers had done froze, and he held our hand, he said. And then he put his arms around us, and he said, boys, it's been a good day. It's been a wonderful day. And he said, that sort of bothered me that my father would say this about my mother. He said, I said, Dad, what are you trying to say? And he said, he looked and he said something that we've never thought about. He said, boys, it happened just the way I wanted it. She got to go first. She didn't have to go through this pain. He said, now we can go home. He said, it dawned on me, and my brother too, we talked later, what Dad was trying to teach us. That's love. When you would care about somebody else, that you would say, I'd rather see you go on than to lay there and suffer. And that's what Jesus did for this woman. He just didn't write it in the sand. He poured it in a love letter on the cross. And he did it for the entire world to see and to hear how much he loved them. And society today is cold. We're frozen worse than little Jennifer Henley. Our hearts are cold. And the only thing, folks, that I know that's going to melt it is us sharing this wonderful news as time's gone about love. I'm going to close with this because remember, we're being watched on television. We're being watched on the internet. And it seems like no matter what I preached, I either have somebody loves me or somebody who don't love me. But that's okay. I keep preaching what Jesus said, not what I think.
There's revival and spreading like a wild